had any role to play in housing. We stepped up in tangible, concrete ways to deliver more housing, to deliver rapid housing, to deliver programs that fought homelessness, programs that increase the rental stocks. We will continue to be investing to support people alongside our partners in the provinces and municipalities.
Leader of the Opposition.
He wants to compare with the Conservative record. I gave him a chance. I told him when the Conservatives left office, the average monthly payment on a new house was $1,400. I asked him to tell us what it is today. Either he doesn't know or he's too afraid to admit, but it's gone up to over $3,100. That's over a 100% increase. When the Prime Minister took office, a two-bedroom apartment in Canada's 10 biggest cities, on average, was $1,100. How much is it today?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, over the past 8 years, we've seen significant growth in the economy. We've seen more Canadians getting jobs than ever before. We've seen more Canadians lifted out of poverty than ever before because of the things we did. From the very first initiative, which was lowering taxes for the middle class and raising them on the wealthiest 1%, initiatives the Conservatives voted against, to delivering a Canada Child benefit that puts more money in the pockets of families that need it and stopped sending child benefit checks to millionaires. We've continued to move forward in supporting communities, supporting home builders, supporting homeowners and home buyers. We will continue to be there for Canadians.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, he would have you believe that Canadians have never had it so good. Well, ask the 9 and 10 young people who believe they will never own a home, the 35-year-olds living in their parents' basements because they can't afford the new doubling of the average down payment, mortgage payment, or rental costs. And speaking of paychecks, when he took office, the average paycheck, you only needed 39% of the average paycheck to make monthly payments on the average house. That number has risen to 62%. By every objective measurement, things are more expensive and Canadians are taking home less. How did he spend so much to achieve so little?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Across the country, we've seen record job growth. We've seen record number of Canadians lifted out of poverty. We've seen investments to fight climate change that have put more money in people's pockets. We've continued to move forward in growing the economy. But it is only, Mr. Speaker, the Conservative leader trying to say Canadians have never had it so good because we know Canadians are struggling. And that's why we continue to step up with investments in dental care, investments in low-income rental supports, two initiatives that the Conservatives voted against. We will continue to be there to deliver for Canadians while we deliver a better future for everyone.
Hear, hear.
Leader of the Opposition.
He's trying to talk about everything but the housing questions I asked. And it's easy to understand why. When he took office, housing was affordable. Now it's impossibly expensive. In fact, it's much more expensive than around the rest of the world. Vancouver is now the third most overpriced housing market, and Toronto the 10th worst in the world, worse than Manhattan, than Singapore, than London, than countless other places with more people, more money, and less land. In fact, the average house price last year in the United States was almost half less than it is here in Canada. Why is housing so much more expensive here than elsewhere in the world? Why?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we have continually invested in programs and supports for Canadians that have seen millions of families entering new homes, getting the supports they needed, millions of refurbishments, millions of supports right across the country. But it's interesting to contrast the Conservative record on that. In the last election campaign, the Conservative platform promise on housing was to give tax breaks to wealthy landlords. That was their approach on housing. Well, we contrasted with significant investments in delivering for first-time home buyers, delivering for people facing homelessness, delivering for Canadian families to access better housing.
Hear, hear.
Honorable député de Belleuil-Chambly.
Monsieur le Président, plusieurs ressortissants, puis justement, on ne connaît pas le nombre, plusieurs ressortissants chinois sous la responsabilité solennelle du premier ministre et que le Canada a accueilli, sont forcés sous la menace de rentrer en Chine. Imaginez ce qui les attend une fois rendus là-bas. Au moment où notre principal allié arrive à Ottawa demain. Est-ce que ce n'est pas une raison de plus pour établir qu'il ne peut pas choisir qui mènera l'enquête et ni établir que cette enquête peut éviter d'être publique?
Bravo. Le très honorable Premier ministre.
Monsieur le Président, depuis les débuts, j'ai dit très clairement que ce n'était pas à moi de lancer une enquête publique parce que c'était peut-être pas la meilleure chose à faire. Et justement, on s'est tourné vers un expert, quelqu'un d'absolument inimputable pour pouvoir répondre et établir la meilleure façon à suivre. C'est pour ça que c'est l'ancien gouverneur général qui va choisir s'il va avoir une enquête publique ou non et quels seront les termes de cette enquête publique pendant qu'il encourage et il s'assure que les différents comités que nous avons fassent leur travail pour établir la vérité et la confiance des Canadiens.
L'honorable député de Belleuil-Chambly.
Justement, Monsieur le Président, permettez-moi de distinguer d'abord entre le régime communiste chinois et le peuple chinois et la culture chinoise extraordinaire et 5 fois millénaire. Mais l'ingérence électorale, le financement illégal, l'espionnage industriel et le rapatriement forcé de Sino-Canadiens, ça suffit, Monsieur le Président. Est-ce que on n'est pas rendu au point où on va établir qu'une nomination complaisante, ça fera pas la job?
Bravo. Bravo. Le très honorable Premier ministre.
Monsieur le Président, je pense que les Canadiens comprennent très bien que pour des enjeux aussi sérieux que celle-ci, ça ne prend pas plus de partisanerie, Monsieur le Président, ça en prend moins. C'est pour ça qu'on a choisi un Canadien éminent qui va pouvoir faire des suivis sur tous ces enjeux-là pour s'assurer que les outils qu'on a, que les façons qu'on a d'assurer l'intégrité de nos systèmes électoraux et de la protection de nos communautés de diaspora va continuer. C'est justement moins de partisanerie que nous on offre pendant que les partis d'opposition en veulent plus.
Exactly. The honourable member for Burnaby South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We're seeing the cost of living continue to hit hard across the country. People are struggling with the cost of everything. We know that some numbers have come down with inflation, but really, where it counts like grocery, inflation is still over 10%. That means people go into a grocery store, pick up items, and realize they can't afford it and put it back. But at the same time, corporate CEOs for these grocery stores are making record profits. So when will the Prime Minister stop the excess profit being made by his CEO friends and stand up for Canadians so they can afford their groceries?
Here, here. Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as inflation was hitting in the fall, we stepped up with support for Canadians, for support for 11 million Canadians with a GST rebate over 6 months. We moved forward on dental care support so that over 200,000 kids can now afford to go to the dentists. We're moved forward with extra help for families that need help on paying their rent. These are the kinds of things we will continue to do to help Canadians. Child care down, cut in half and down to $10 a day for millions of families across this country. These are the kinds of things that have made a difference. We will continue to be there for Canadians, including with the budget coming out next week.
Honourable member for Burnaby South.
Le coût de la vie augmente. C'est de plus en plus difficile à rejoindre les deux bouts. Particulièrement, c'est difficile de trouver du logement abordable. Depuis que ce Premier ministre a été élu, les loyers ont doublé. Parce que les règles créées par les conservateurs et les libéraux favorisent les ultra-riches. Donc, comment est-ce que ce Premier ministre va arrêter de favoriser ses amis riches et bâtir plus de logements abordables pour monsieur, madame, tout le monde?
Bravo. Très honorable Premier ministre.
Monsieur le Président, depuis 8 ans, on a fait des investissements historiques en logement pour aider les Canadiens à accéder à des logements plus abordables. C'est pour ça d'ailleurs que j'étais tellement content d'être à Guelph, en Ontario, la semaine passée, pour annoncer 4 milliards de dollars d'investissement dans les municipalités à travers le pays pour accélérer la création de logements, particulièrement des logements abordables. Nous savons qu'il y a encore beaucoup de travail à faire, mais avec notre accélérateur pour le logement, avec notre programme de logement rapide, avec les programmes contre l'itinérance, avec des programmes d'abordabilité, nous allons continuer d'être là pour les Canadiens.
Honorable chef de l'opposition.
Ask the Prime Minister why it is that mortgage payments have doubled under his 8 years, why rent payments have doubled under his 8 years, why Canadian house prices are about 72% more expensive than their American counterparts, even though they have 10 times the population on even less land. He couldn't answer any of these questions. The answer, according to Scotiabank, is Canada has the lowest number of housing units per 1,000 residents of any G7 country. The number of housing units per 1,000 Canadians has been falling since 2016, right when the Prime Minister took office. Why is the Prime Minister continually given billions of dollars to municipal government gatekeepers to block construction for Canadian homes?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, this goes to the heart of the disagreement on housing between the Leader of the Opposition and I. I recognized, and this government recognized, that we need to work with municipalities to help them change zoning laws, to help them accelerate their permitting processes, to create more opportunities to build affordable homes for Canadians across the country, whereas he sits back and attacks them and proposes absolutely nothing. We're stepping up with $4 billion to accelerate the supply of homes across this country. We will continue to be investing and working with partners instead of picking fights with everyone and hoping that it all settles itself.
Leader of the Opposition.
No, actually, the disagreement is that under our government, housing was affordable. Under this government, it's eye-poppingly expensive. That's the disagreement. And let's just look at the facts. Canada has the fewest houses per capita of any country in the G7, even though we have the most land to build on. Why? We rank 64th in the OECD in the time it takes to get a building permit. Government red tape adds as much as $650,000 to each house in some cities. And the Prime Minister has made it worse by giving the gatekeepers who block the building more money. Why?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, this goes to the heart of the announcement we made last week on the Housing Accelerator Fund, which does work directly with municipalities to accelerate the delivery and the construction of affordable housing. Now, Mr. Speaker, what the member opposite would have you believe is that doing nothing to address the housing crisis would have somehow made it better. He criticizes us for the investments of billions of dollars in housing over the past years. Just think, if things are expensive now, how much worse it would have been had we had a Conservative government that continued to cross its arms and cut services to Canadians for the past 8 years.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
You don't have to imagine what prices would have been were I making the decisions, because when I was the housing minister, the average mortgage payment and the average rent payment were half of what they are now. It's called history. Now, his solution is to continue to send billions of dollars. He spent $89 billion on housing affordability to double mortgage payments, double rental costs, double the needed down payment. How did he spend so much to achieve so little?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Next thing, the member opposite's going to complain that housing prices are higher today than they were in my father's time as Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we are going to continue to invest in Canadians and recognize that while we grow the economy,
I'm going to have to interrupt the Right Honourable Prime Minister. I'm having a hard time hearing the answer, and I'm sure other people are. The Right Honourable Prime Minister, you've got about 20 seconds left. Please continue.
Mr. Speaker, every step of the way we've contributed to a growing economy, to lifting Canadians out of poverty, to putting more money in the pockets of the middle class and people working hard to join it. And that's why we're continuing to invest in building houses, in working with municipalities, in working with the provinces on fighting homelessness, creating affordable homes, and creating more opportunities for all Canadians.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
You know, when you look at his promise to make it easier for Canadians to get a home, and since that time, the payments have actually doubled. You listen to him rattle off the billions he's spent to achieve that failure. He kind of reminds you of that shady contractor who promises you that he'll build you a brand new home, but the cost just keeps going up and up and up, and the house never actually gets built, Mr. Speaker. And that is exactly where young people are today, stuck in their parents' basements, their dreams crushed because they can't get themselves a home and start a family. Instead of siding with the gatekeeper and sending billions of dollars more money to those bureaucracies, why won't he get them out of the way to bring homes Canadians can afford?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservative leader is actually arguing that less investments in Canadians, less investments alongside municipalities and provinces, fewer programs to support Canadians would somehow have solved this problem. That's the problem with Conservatives. They think that cuts can create growth. They think that fewer investments in Canadians will get people to pull themselves up by their bootstraps and succeed. Mr. Speaker, we believe in investing in the middle class and people working hard to join it, and that's why Canadians is doing better than they were before.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
In other words, we should forgive him for failing because he fails expensively. You know, Mr. Speaker, what we propose is actually to incentivize home building. Why doesn't the government link the number of federal infrastructure dollars a big city gets to the number of houses that actually get completed? That would incentivize them to get the gatekeepers out of the way. We could bring in penalties for big city bureaucrats that block construction and boost infrastructure dollars for those that get out of the way. Why won't he pay for results instead of paying for failure?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians well remember that when the honourable member was in government, the characterization of the relationships between provinces, municipalities and the federal government were fights all the time. Conflicts and fights with cities, conflicts and fights with rural mayors, conflicts and fights with provinces, and cuts to services that Canadians relied on. And he is demonstrating that 8 years of investments in Canadians, in growth, in lifting Canadians out of poverty, in creating jobs, in fighting climate change, just makes him want to go back to the good old days of Stephen Harper with cuts and fights with everyone.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, he says that Canadians shouldn't worry about the fact that our young people are living in homeless shelters while they go to school, or that they're condemned to tent cities or their parents' basements, because all the politicians are getting along. And that's what's important. As long as we go along to get along and have wonderful meetings and conversations, he believes we shouldn't worry about the poverty that the gatekeeping policies are causing. Why won't the Prime Minister link federal infrastructure dollars for cities to the number of houses they allow to be built? Right. Find those gatekeepers who block and bonus those that build so that we can have more affordable homes for our young people.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
The member opposite wants to talk about poverty. Let's talk about poverty. The very first thing he did after we became government was vote against a tax hike on the wealthiest so we could lower them for the middle class. He then voted against a Canada Child Benefit that has lifted hundreds of thousands of kids out of poverty. We created millions of jobs while lifting millions of Canadians out of poverty, Mr. Speaker. Our focus on growing the middle class and supporting people working hard to join it has delivered and is continuing to deliver even as we stand with people going through difficult times right now. You cannot grow this economy through cuts, no matter much he shouts that he...
I'm sorry? L'honorable député de Belleuil-Chambly.
Monsieur le Président, le Premier ministre dit qu'il ne faut pas être partisan. Il faut le faire, là. Il dit qu'il ne faut pas être partisan. Alors pourquoi est-ce qu'on a l'impression, beaucoup de monde dans cette Chambre, qui est prête à faire tout, n'importe quoi, et le contraire, pour ne pas avoir d'enquête publique, indépendante, et qui devient urgente et qui ne soit pas menée par un ami de la famille?
Très honorable Premier ministre.
Monsieur le Président, ce à quoi les Canadiens s'attendent, c'est que des enjeux aussi sérieux que l'ingérence étrangère, particulièrement chinoise, soient traités de façon sérieuse et responsable. Et c'est exactement ce que nous savons très bien que l'ancien gouverneur général va faire, de questionner son engagement envers les Canadiens, envers le Canada, n'est pas digne de cette Chambre. Nous savons que c'est un homme qui va livrer la marchandise pour les Canadiens et restaurer la confiance des gens malgré toutes les attaques partisanes qui lui sont dirigées.
Honorable député de Belleuil-Chambly.
Mon point, c'est que la marchandise à livrer, c'est pour l'entièreté de la Chambre et l'entièreté des citoyens, et ça, je ne suis pas convaincu. Tous les partis d'opposition en cette Chambre veulent une enquête publique indépendante. Alors que les caméras des États-Unis au complet vont se tourner vers Ottawa, qui tolère l'ingérence? Qui a l'air d'avoir quelque chose à cacher, Monsieur le Président? Qui est partisan ici?
Le très honorable Premier ministre.
Président, on a établi un processus indépendant à l'intérieur d'un problème réel avec l'ingérence chinoise. Mais c'est pas juste le rapporteur spécial qu'on a choisi. C'est aussi, on a créé un comité de parlementaires, incluant un membre du Bloc québécois, qui ont la cote de sécurité assez élevée pour pouvoir fouiller dans tout ce qu'on nous dit, dans tout ce que le travail que font nos agences de sécurité et qui vont publier des rapports, comme ils l'ont toujours fait, que le Parlement peut lire et prendre connaissance. Notre travail est fait de façon indépendante et non partisan. Ce n'est que les partis d'opposition qui continuent à chercher des avantages politiques là-dedans.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Well, the Prime Minister has failed to make housing affordable even after $89 billion precious tax dollars have been spent on that failure. I've suggested to him we should link the number of dollars a big city gets to the number of houses they allow to be built to incentivize more building. He doesn't like that idea. Well, he doesn't like results, but here's another idea. We build transit stations with federal money. In the most successful transit and housing jurisdictions on Earth, there are apartments next to those stations. Will the Prime Minister require every federally funded transit station have high-density apartments so that our seniors and young people can live right next to the bus or train?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, first I want to congratulate the Leader of the Opposition for actually talking about concrete ideas. For a long time, his only recommendation to help Canadians was invest in Bitcoin. That'll help you avoid inflation. But now he's talking about credible opportunities to help Canadians. What's nice, though, Mr. Speaker, is the idea of density around transit hubs is something that we're already moving forward on and have invested in over the past few years. We know how important is that. But I will remind the member opposite that in order to invest in density around transit hubs, one has to invest in public transit, which his government never did, which we have continued to do to record levels.
Of the Opposition.
The difference is, like housing, we actually got it built. And what I'm proposing is not to dream about housing around transit, but to actually require every single federally funded transit station be pre-approved for high-density housing so our young people and our seniors can live right next to the bus and train. He doesn't like that idea. Well, how about this one? He's got 37,000 many of them largely empty buildings, big, ugly buildings. Why doesn't he sell off 15% of them so we can convert those into affordable housing for our young people?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Part of a question period and answer period needs to be taking yes for an answer. And I said yes. Not only do we like the idea of density around public transit spaces, we've been doing it for years. We've been putting it in our agreements with municipalities as we invest historic amounts in public transit. Now, the government, the former Conservative government, refused to invest in any infrastructure larger than a doorknob or an economic action plan sign. We're continuing to invest in significant public transit, including with a permanent public transit fund, something that the Conservatives have again campaigned against. We will continue to be there to invest in Canadians.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Their very first infrastructure project was to install a doorknob in the Prime Minister's office when they took office, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, speaking of housing.
Order. 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 We want to hear the questions as much as we want to hear the answers. So I'm going to ask everyone just to take a deep breath and calm down. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition, you got 21 seconds left.
I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker. Sometimes I even crack myself up here. But, Mr. Speaker, he is presiding over a 37,000 building empire. These big, ugly, and largely empty buildings. Why doesn't he sell off 15% of 6,000 buildings so that we can convert those buildings into affordable housing for our young people so that they can actually have a roof over their head and a place to call home?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Once again, this is an idea that we're already moving forward with, looking at federal properties and how we can convert them either through the rapid housing process or by working with municipalities to deliver more affordable housing. But I'm very pleased to see the member opposite moving off his recommendations on buying Bitcoin as a way of avoiding inflation and actually putting forward concrete ideas. It's great to have a real debate over ideas. I wish he'd paid attention to the ideas we have so he can maybe propose different ones or perhaps better ones.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the only ideas he's put forward on housing is to double the rent, double the mortgage costs, double down payments, and this is on the backs of hardworking Canadians who are paying more tax than ever. On April 1st, he wants to raise the cost of housing even more by increasing the cost of home heating, a monthly expense that goes with owning a home. This at a time when seniors are already making the heartbreaking decision between eating and heating. He wants to triple the carbon tax. Will he cancel his plan to raise taxes on our seniors, on our workers, on our farmers, and get his hands out of their pockets?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as of April, the places across the country that have the carbon backstop in place will receive more money. We are delivering more money than the price on pollution costs to average families across this country because we know that people both want to see us fighting climate change and preparing for the economy and challenges of the future while making things more affordable to Canadians. That's why our climate action incentive puts more money back in the pockets of people in his riding, people right across the country in backstop areas. We will continue to fight climate change and support affordability for Canadians.
Member for Burnaby.